Ass to grass, ATG, is the almost mythical standard whispered and sometimes shouted in gyms worldwide. The ultimate display of squatting prowess, the supposed key to unlocking massive leg growth. But what if I told you that chasing that extreme depth, for many, is not just unnecessary, but potentially dangerous? Is squatting ATG pure genius or a fast track to injury?
Inducted Carter, that debate is huge. You see elite lifters hitting incredible depth, and then you hear horror stories about herniated discs and wrecked knees, often blamed on squatting too deep. As a coach, I constantly get asked, how low should I really go? It feels like dogma versus genuine fear. Welcome back to Strength and Unleashed, the podcast where we cut through the noise with science and strategy. I'm Coach Ava Rostova.
And I'm Dr. Ben Carter. Eva, that conflict is exactly why we're tackling this. The fitness world is divided. Today we're moving beyond the dogma and the fear-mongering. We're providing a biomechanical breakdown of squat depth, exploring the real benefits of ATG for hypertrophy versus the potential risks, and helping you find the perfect science-backed range of motion for your goals and your unique body.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. What technically defines an ass-to-grass squat? Is it literally hamstrings covering calves?
Generally, ATG implies squatting to the deepest possible depth your mobility allows, typically where the hamstrings make contact or pass below the level of the calves, resulting in deep knee and hip flexion, well beyond parallel, where the hip crease is below the top of the knee. It requires significant mobility in the ankles, hips, and thoracic spine.
And why has it become such a benchmark? Almost a badge of honor for many lifters. What are the proposed benefits that drive this ATG obsession?
The arguments for ATG are primarily rooted in full range of motion, ROM principle, the belief that training a muscle through its longest possible path under load maximizes hypertrophy or muscle growth by activating more muscle fibers and creating more muscle damage or stimulus. Increased glute and hamstring activation. Studies do show that deeper squats generally lead to greater activation of the glutes and adductors compared to partial squats. Some argue this leads to better overall leg development. Improved mobility and joint health, proponents view. Some believe that regularly moving joints through their full range of motion helps maintain or improve mobility and resilience. Sport specificity. For Olympic weightlifters, achieving a deep squat position is essential for the snatch and clean and jerk.
Okay, so the core argument is more RAM equals more muscle, plus potentially better mobility and function. That sounds compelling on the surface. But where does the injury part of the title come in? What are the biomechanical risks we need to understand?
This is where nuance is critical. The primary risks associated with forcing extreme depth, especially if an individual lacks the requisite mobility or anatomical structure, include lumbar flexion, butt wink. This is the big one. As someone descends beyond their active hip mobility, the pelvis may tilt posteriorly, tuck under, causing the lumbar spine to round. Squatting with heavy load on the flexed spine significantly increases shear forces and the risk of disc injury. Hip impingement, femoral acetabular impingement, FAI. Due to variations in hip socket depth and femur shape, some individuals' bones may physically collide at deep levels of hip flexion, potentially causing pain and long-term joint damage. Forcing depth here is actively harmful. Excessive knee stress, context-dependent. While compressive forces increase with depth, which can be good for tendons and ligaments if managed, poor form at deep angles like excessive forward knee travel without adequate ankle mobility or knee valgus can increase shear forces and stress on ligaments like the ACL or PCL, especially if uncontrolled.
So, we've identified the potential benefits championed by ATG advocates and the significant biomechanical risks, particularly lumbar flexion and hip impingement.
That butt wink is something I see all the time when people try to force depth they don't own. They think hitting depth is the goal, regardless of what their spine is doing.
Exactly. And that highlights a crucial point. Optimal squat depth is highly individual. It depends heavily on hip anatomy, the depth and orientation of your hip sockets, acetabulum, and the shape of your femoral head and neck dramatically influence how much deep, safe hip flexion is possible before bony contact occurs. Some people are simply not built for ATG without compensation. Femur to torso ratio. Individuals with relatively long femurs compared to their torso length will naturally need to lean forward more during a squat. This can make achieving deep squats without lumbar flexion more challenging compared to someone with shorter femurs and a longer torso. Ankle mobility, dorsiflexion. Limited ankle mobility is a massive restrictor. If your ankles can't dorsiflex enough, knees travel forward over toes, your body will compensate, often by lifting the heels, leaning excessively forward, or forcing lumbar flexion, butt wink, to achieve depth. Thoracic spine mobility. Limited upper back mobility can prevent maintaining an upright chest, causing forward lean and potentially contributing to lower back rounding.
So telling everyone they must squat ATG is like telling everyone they must wear the same size shoe. It ignores individual structure and mobility limitations. It sets people up for failure or injury.
Exactly. And that highlights a crucial point. Optimal squat depth is highly individual. It depends heavily on hip anatomy, femur to torso ratio, ankle mobility, and thoracic spine mobility.
So telling everyone they must squat ATG is like telling everyone they must wear the same size shoe. It ignores individual structure and mobility limitations. It sets people up for failure or injury.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from effective training to achieving an arbitrary depth standard, often at the expense of safety and proper muscle stimulation. The mindset should be, what is the deepest I can squat with perfect spinal neutrality and without pain? That is your optimal depth for that session.
Okay, so ATG isn't a universal requirement and can be risky if forced. Does this mean partial or parallel squats are useless for growth, as some ATG purists might claim?
Absolutely not. Let's discuss the science behind parallel squats, hip crease below knee, and even partial squats. Muscle activation. While peak glute activation might occur at deeper ranges, parallel squats still heavily stimulate the quads, glutes, and adductors significantly. The vastus lateralis, or outer quad, might even see peak activation around parallel. Load potential. Squatting to parallel or slightly above generally allows you to handle heavier loads compared to ATG. This increased mechanical tension can be a powerful driver for strength and hypertrophy, even with slightly reduced range of motion. Specificity for strength or power. For many athletes, powerlifters hitting competition depth, field athletes needing power in specific ranges, training to parallel or slightly above is more specific and allows for greater force production development in the relevant range. Safety and accessibility. For individuals with mobility restrictions or anatomical limitations preventing safe ATG, parallel squats offer a highly effective and much safer alternative to load the legs heavily.
So parallel squats are still fantastic for building overall leg mass and strength, and potentially safer and more applicable for many people, especially those focused on maximal strength or with mobility issues. What about even higher partial squats?
Even partial range of motion squats have their place, though perhaps less so for general hypertrophy. They can be used for targeted overload. Heavy partials in the top range can overload the quads and connective tissues. Specific sticking points. Athletes might use partials to strengthen a weak point in their lift. Rehabilitation. Sometimes used early in rehab protocols. But for general muscle growth, aiming for at least parallel depth, if possible, safely, is typically superior to consistent high partials due to the greater muscle stretch and activation through a longer ROM.
This provides so much clarity. It's not ATG versus useless, it's a spectrum, and the best depth depends on the individual and their goals. We need to shift the conversation from how low can you go to how low should you go for your body and your goals. Let's refine this further and talk about how someone can determine their optimal depth and structure their training accordingly.
Welcome back to Strength Unleashed. We've dismantled the ATG or nothing myth and explored the biomechanics and benefits across the spectrum of squat depth. Now the crucial question, how does an individual determine their optimal, effective, and safe squat depth?
This is what everyone needs to know. It sounds like it requires some self-assessment and honesty, maybe leaving the ego at the door.
Absolutely. Here's a practical process. Assess your mobility unloaded. Before adding weight, see how deep you can go unloaded while maintaining form. Body weight squat test. Film yourself from the side, squatting as deep as possible. Watch for the exact point where your lower back starts to round, butt wink, begins. That point, just before the wink, is your current active, safe depth limit. Ankle mobility check. Can your knees travel forward over your toes significantly without your heels lifting? If not, ankle mobility is likely a primary limiter. Hip mobility check. Assess internal, external hip rotation and flexion. Pain or pinching deep in the hip during a deep squat could indicate FAI or other mobility issues. Prioritize spinal neutrality. Under load, maintaining a neutral, not rounded, not excessively arched spine is paramount for safety. Your depth should never compromise spinal position. If you see butt wink happening with weight, you've gone too deep for that load or your bracing or technique needs work. Listen to your body. Pain versus discomfort. Muscle fatigue and the discomfort of effort are normal. Sharp, pinching, or persistent joint pain is not. Pain is a signal to stop, assess, and potentially reduce depth or modify the movement. Consider your goals. Max hypertrophy. Aim for the deepest depth you can achieve with perfect form, ideally at least parallel, to maximize muscle stretch and activation. Work on mobility to safely increase this depth over time. Max strength, powerlifting. Train to your competition standard, typically hip crease below knee, and potentially slightly below, allowing for maximal load handling in the required range. Joint health and longevity. Focus on a comfortable, pain-free depth that allows consistent training without exacerbating issues. Quality over depth is key.
So film yourself, identify your butt wink point, check ankles and hips, always prioritize a neutral spine under load, and tailor the depth to your specific goal. Hypertrophy versus strength versus longevity. That's a fantastic framework. What if someone discovers their safe depth is only parallel, but they really want more glute growth, which you said benefits from depth?
Great question. This is where intelligent exercise selection comes in. If you can only safely squat to parallel, you can still maximize glute growth by using parallel squats effectively. Employ techniques like pauses at the bottom, slower eccentrics, and sufficient volume in the parallel range. They still build significant glute mass. Supplementing with deeper range exercises. Incorporate exercises that allow deeper hip flexion safely even if the squat pattern is limited. Examples: Bulgarian split squats, allow a deeper stretch on the front glute. Lunges, various directions, work the glutes through different ranges. Deep step-ups can achieve significant hip flexion. Glute bridges or hip thrusts directly target glute extension, complementing the squat pattern.
So don't force unsafe squat depth. Just add other exercises that hit the muscles through a longer range if needed. That makes perfect sense. Use the right tool for the job.
Exactly. Don't try to make the barbell squat do everything if your body isn't suited for it. Build your program around your capabilities and your goals, using a variety of effective movements.
What about the mindset aspect? How do we overcome the pressure to squat ATG if it's not right for us, especially when you see others doing it online or in the gym?
This requires the Strength Unleashed mindset. Educate yourself, like today. Understand your anatomy and biomechanics. Knowledge defeats dogma. Focus on internal progress, not external comparison. Your goal is to optimize your body and your results safely and effectively, not to match someone else's depth who has different levers, mobility, or goals. Prioritize longevity. Training is a lifelong pursuit. Sacrificing your joints for an arbitrary depth standard driven by ego is short-sighted. Train in a way that allows you to keep training powerfully for decades. Redefine good squat. A good squat is one performed with excellent technique, appropriate load, and through the maximal, safe, and effective range of motion for you, stimulating the target muscles towards your goal. Depth is only one variable and not always the most important one.
Train for your body, focus on quality, prioritize longevity. That's a powerful message that cuts right through the ATG hype. Let's consolidate this into actionable takeaways and wrap up this crucial discussion.
We've journeyed through the biomechanics, risks, and benefits surrounding the ass-to-grass squat debate. We've established that optimal depth is individual.
So, Dr. Carter, let's deliver the final verdict. Squatting ass to grass. Genius or injury?
The verdict is, it depends entirely on the individual and the execution. For individuals with the requisite mobility and anatomical structure enabling deep squats without lumbar flexion or hip impingement, ATG can be a genius tool for maximizing hypertrophy, especially glutes and adductors, and maintaining full-range joint health if performed correctly. For individuals lacking the mobility, having prohibitive anatomy, like certain hip structures, or unable to maintain spinal neutrality at depth, forcing ATG is a potential path to injury. In these cases, squatting to parallel or their maximal safe depth is far superior.
It's not black and white. The potential for genius exists, but the risk of injury is real if individual factors are ignored. Focus on your optimal depth.
Precisely. Let's summarize the actionable steps for listeners. Assess your unloaded depth. Film yourself. Find your butt wink point. Check ankle and hip mobility. Prioritize neutral spine always. Under load, never sacrifice spinal position for depth. Determine your optimal depth based on assessment, goals, hypertrophy, strength, longevity, and pain signals. Work on mobility if applicable. If restrictions, for example, ankles, limit safe depth and deeper squats align with your goals, dedicate time to mobility work. Use squat variations and accessory lifts. Don't rely solely on the barbell back squat. Use front squats, goblet squats, safety bar squats, lunges, split squats, hip thrusts, etc. to achieve your goals safely and effectively. Ditch the ego. Train for effective stimulus and long-term progress, not for arbitrary depth standards set by others.
That's a clear, actionable roadmap. It empowers people to make informed decisions about their own training rather than blindly following trends.
And that is the ultimate goal of Strength Unleashed, to provide you with the scientific understanding and strategic mindset to take control of your training and achieve your potential safely and sustainably. The squat is a tool. Learn how to use your version of that tool effectively for your body.
Dr. Carter, this has been an incredibly valuable discussion, cutting through so much confusion. I know our listeners will benefit immensely from this nuanced perspective.
Knowledge is power, Eva. Apply this knowledge, train smart, and build a resilient body for life.
For everyone wanting to dive deeper into assessing their squat, fixing butt wink, and programming effectively for their optimal depth, keep an eye out for our upcoming content. And if you need personalized guidance, check out the coaching options linked in the description.
If this episode provided clarity on the squat depth debate, please hit that like button, subscribe to Strength Unleashed for more evidence-based training insights, and share this with a friend who might be forcing unsafe depth. Leave a comment. What is your current squat depth goal and why? Go find your perfect squat and train powerfully.